All right, here we are. What's going on, folks? I'm
Hey,
Trey. That's Keith at the bottom. And this is our good friend Brandon Beightol from Phinny Hill Vineyard. Brandon has been managing Phinny Hill for a while now. He took over from his dad, the infamous Dick Beightol, who was just a incredible person in our world and in the wine world. Unfortunately, Brandon's dad passed away a few years ago, but Brandon has kept the legacy going at Phinny. And we've been working with that vineyard we were just talking about it, I think 2000. Did we work with that vineyard in 2010 and 11, Keith? Do you remember?
yeah. So
Because
yes,
2012 for
when
sure
I
we had
came,
the old
yes,
block of the old
yes,
block.
when I came on board, there was Phinny Hill Cabernet 2010 in barrel.
There we go.
Ended up going in the Illusionist in the 2010 Illusionist. Then in 2011, yes, I remember that was a star of 2011, and then 2012 was a Black Circle. So yeah, I think 2010 was your first vintage with it.
Okay. We've been working with the vineyard for a while and loved it so much that we approached Dick and Brandon back in 2012 about planting an estate block essentially for us. Something we had a really long-term contract, I think 20-year contract, where we don't have to worry about every 4 to 5 years having to renew a contract, maybe having that fruit taken and given to somebody else. Not that Brandon would do that to us, I don't think, but it's really kind of how we've situated a lot of our contracts. So we have long-term availability of the fruit. It's the same block, same grapes every year. So there's some consistency in what we're doing. So Brandon, thanks so much for joining us, buddy.
Thanks for having me. It's fun.
Yeah, you bet. So for the folks who are not familiar with Phinny Hill, why don't you just give them a little bit of background about the vineyard overall? You know, when did your dad, or maybe you and your dad, but when did you guys establish that vineyard? First grapes went in. What was the acreage back then, and kind of what is the acreage today? And then we could sort of dive into some of the details about the actual vineyard site. But let's maybe get a little bit of history about that site first.
All right. Yeah. Quick outline on the vineyard. The first vines that were planted was in 1998. And so this would have been when I was off at Walla Walla Community, or possibly before I moved on to WSU. But first vines went in then. We had done some apples prior to that. But I believe the first year was around 30 acres that they went in. And that stemmed from a couple of things. My brother had done an internship at St. Michel, and then I think Colin Morrell was the one he was working with that had then later approached them about putting some grapes in. So that would have been the jump on board.
Yeah, were those, so initially the grapes were going to go to St. Michel, that was the idea?
Ooh, you're going to give me off on names that have changed over the years. It was I forget who it was that Colin was working for. It wasn't St. Michel, and it wasn't Hogue.
Okay.
Yeah, that's terrible. I should know this, but
That's all right. But it seems like Phinny started attracting smaller producers after you guys had vines in the ground and grapes started coming out of your vineyard. It seems like, at least, in my experience, and I know you work with Dunham cellars. I know that for a long time you were an important part of the beauty winery program before they shut down their doors a couple of years ago, and just a bunch of small producers. I know from the quality standpoint, there's something really attractive about the fruit that you guys grow out there. And working with St. Michel, obviously they're a very large winery. It's interesting you guys work with the small guys and you work with the big guys. Tell me about some of the challenges from your perspective, kind of having to work with two different almost entities in general. These massive company like St. Michel and then these small guys like us.
Yeah, it does become tricky because you're definitely trying to produce a tonnage based crop or a quality based crop. So there is some variances there on how you want to go about it. it is also a little hard to slack on one side. So I always joke that they get pretty high quality fruit for a tonnage based price. But yeah, originally I believe the goal with my dad and my brother when they would talk about that was to try to stay about 50-50, to have some large producers where we're doing machine pick, maybe a little bit easier to manage, and then, you know, try to really focus on the high end quality side of things. And kind of one of the early things to that, my dad was always big on wanting the winemaker to be able to be as involved as he wants to. Is if you want to have a say in every decision that happens, we want you to be part of the team. And if you want to step back and just say, hey, send me these grapes when they're ready, then we want to do that too.
I think your dad did a pretty good job of encouraging winemakers to come visit your vineyard, even though you really are a long ways out there. You're about and I'll pull up a map of where you're located here in a second, but you're about an hour and 40-minute drive for us from Walla Walla. And, you know, for the Woodinville guys, you know, it's a haul to get out there. But I feel like your dad bribed all these winemakers to come down with his tuna fish sandwiches. He made like this really incredible tuna fish sandwich. Every time we would go see your dad, we'd walk the vineyard site, and then we'd end up in your kitchen or in their kitchen at their house. And, you know, he's making a great espresso, so get some caffeine for the way back. And he made these great tuna fish sandwiches. So I always felt like he was making them just for me. But then I talked to all the other winemakers, like, do you taste the Dick's tuna fish sandwich? So apparently he made it for everybody.
Yeah, I joke a lot of times that we're more known for the tuna fish and coffee around here than the wine grapes. But truly, probably one of the biggest things I miss is how well my dad was at getting people to stop for a minute and enjoy that conversation. And where a lot of times I'm out there doing stuff and winemakers stop by and I say, hey, you want to call? Oh, I'm busy, I gotta go. And I say, okay, see you later. Where he wouldn't take that as an answer. I always had to help people escape because they would have other places to be, but they'd be stuck in there with dad.
You're gonna have to come up with your own. You're going to come up with your own special sandwich, Brandon, to keep us around.
Still doing the coffee every morning.
Hey, I'm going to pull up a screen grab real quick so we can get an idea about where you're located compared to where we are. So right here, we're looking at. You guys can see that.
Yep.
Yeah. So here we got Walla Walla over here. This little blue spot is where Phinny is. So you've got the Columbia River coming down through the middle of Washington, and then it makes that big bend to the west, going right by Hermiston and Boardman. And where that river makes that turn right through here is kind of an important, I guess, geological aspect of where your vineyard is located, because you know, one of the windiest spots in the country consistently is Hood River. And when those winds are kind of coming through the Cascade Mountains right here, they continue to blow up the river and they blow right through your site. I think you're definitely one of the windiest sites, maybe with the exception of Weather Eye, the very, very top of Weather Eye, because it's on top of Red Mountain. But I think your vineyard site is one of the windiest sites out there. So as we zoom in, the one thing I noticed, Brandon, is all these circle farms that are around you. And what is the main crop through here?
Ooh, I would say potatoes and carrots are going to be your main crops there. There's also a lot of sweet corn, garlic, onions, all kinds of different crops mixed in there. But I think those are the staples. It would be potatoes and carrots. Okay.
And then as you zoom in a little closer, you can sort of see, okay, that no longer circle farms. There's what old circle farms, you sort of divided, but now you can see these vineyard sites that are through here. Tell us about some of your neighbors. You've got a famous neighbor just to the east of you. Why don't you tell us about some of your neighbors and how long grape growing has been happening in your area there?
Yeah, so just to the east, the circle there was was Mercer's original winery, but then later became Shampoo Vineyards. And so
that's Paul Shampoo.
Paul Shampoo, one of Washington's most famous vineyards, or definitely on the top tier level, which has been a huge asset for us, being across the street, on the hill overlooking Shampoo Vineyard. So their fame has definitely helped get people interested in our fruit for sure.
Yeah, that was planted in the early 70s, 72, 73, I think. The original plantings of the old block. And that fruit goes to Quilceda Creek, Woodward Canyon. Gosh, who are the other partners out there? Powers? Was Powers one of the owners of that? Or and
I
so
believe,
we
yeah,
zoom
Powers
down here, and
definitely
there's the old Shampoo block, and then here's the road goes north south, and on the west side of that road is Phinny Hill Vineyard, and you can see right here is the shop and the house. We'll zoom in a little more. This is the shop. This is the house right here, and then I put Elene's block over here. It's actually right here, but we have this little 5-acre block right here of 1 acre of Cabernet. And we've got 4 acres of, 1 acre of Cab Franc and 4 acres of Cabernet Sauvignon that we work with Brandon. And it's fairly flat on top, but when you get to where the house is and you see these roads that are going down here, it's a fairly steep incline down to the road. The one thing I find unique about your site, Brandon, is you're almost at the exact elevation as our winery. Keith, what do we sit at? 800 feet?
Yeah, just under 800 feet here at the winery.
I think that, Brandon, your vineyard site sits around 780 to 800 feet as well. Is that right?
Yep. Up top there where your block is and the runway is right around 780.
And, in Walla Walla, we say, gosh, that's really cold. It's a really hard spot to grow grapes because it's just such a low elevation. But the difference between our site and your site is the fact that you guys are kind of up on this ridge, and you have a lot of drainage around you. You have drainage to the east. You've got drainage to the north that goes into these canyons here. Tell us about the winters at your site. What kind of temperature do you see? What kind of challenges do you see from the growing perspective?
Yeah, so the one funny thing, I love Google Earth because I always think somebody would it would take a long time to figure out why my blocks are all planted in weird triangles and circles and shapes, but that's because of some irrigated pivots that were pre-vineyard time out there.
Yeah.
But yeah, as you zoom out there, you can see the huge Alder Creek Canyon, which would be to the southwest
over here.
Of us. That is a great natural drainage, and that goes all the way out to the Columbia River. So you have that one. You have the canyons to the north that are going to filter some air. So I always kind of laugh, either it's fate or luck, or the land was never acquired to be vineyard land. It was going to be irrigated crops and in circle pivots. So the fact that we ended up in the vineyard world, I mean, you couldn't have asked for a better spot with better air drainage. We do have cold spots next to all of those canyons. Any of our lower blocks do have a little bit more risk for cold, but for the most part, up on top of the hill, we're pretty safe.
Have you been affected in a major way by the big freezes? The 2004 freeze, for instance, that winter freeze during 2009, the 2017. Mm-hmm. We had some pretty hard winter freezes, not necessarily spring frost, fall frost, but kind of those -10, -15 degree kind of temperatures. Did you seen any long-term damage from those, or do you feel like you guys are in a pretty protected spot there?
Yeah, either protected or lucky. I moved back in the summer of 2010, and there was the year, I believe it was that 2009 freeze, where just to the north of Shampoo Vineyards, my brother was the GM at that vineyard, and they cut back to the ground early to combat the damage that had come. We'll see weaker blocks here and there because of the cold weather, but since I've been back, we've been fortunate enough to never have to cut something back to the ground necessarily. Besides on new plantings, every now and then you have a percentage of the block that gets hit a little harder with winter before they get older and get a little more strength to them.
Sure. In regards to the soil series out there, is it a combination of a bunch of different soils, or is it fairly even throughout the vineyard? And what soil series are you working with out there?
So because it is on the hilltop, we fall in some different on the topographic map, or you can find all the different layers there. Up on the top of the ridge, where your blocks are, through that top area where the house and the runway is, that's part of the Malga series, like a Malga gravelly fine sandy loam. And then we also have a good amount of some Warden silt loam out there also.
Okay. Yeah, I know that walking through some of our blocks, we do notice what look to be pieces of granite, which of course we don't have any granite in our subsoils here in Eastern Washington. And so you have to assume that they came from the Missoula floods. And at a low elevation at 780, 800 feet, that definitely falls within the flood zone. And so when the Missoula floods happened, I'm assuming they just sort of rolled right over the land right there and deposited some of these, what we see as these granite, not necessarily boulders, but rocks and things of that nature throughout the block, sort of scattered around the area. Did you notice that when you're farming it and when you were ripping soils and stuff?
Oh yeah, there's a couple. We try to line them all up somewhere or place them somewhere to be little I don't know, markers and make the place look neat. But there's one, I call it Roundabout Rock. It's about half the size of a car. That's a huge chunk of granite, and we got a bunch of ones along the driveway lined up in some other spots where we found those. So yeah, definitely looks to be even like the Malga series where your block is, that's considered a glacial outwash type soil.
Okay. And let's talk about the wind, because we mentioned how windy it is out there, and how that affects your grape growing. What are some of the things that you do to combat the wind? What are some of the things that the wind actually do to the vine and end up doing to the grapes?
I definitely windy here. Being down the river from one of the best windsurfing spots in the world, you can expect that. So I think the biggest thing is grapes tend to thrive on stress and poor soils, rocky drainage soils. I think the wind is another factor that's constantly beating on the vines and helping keeping them in that stressful point where then you're really at control with the water and how those plants are going to grow. So I think that would be one characteristic that the Horse Heaven Hills gets, is from the wind beating up on the vines constantly. As far as farming to combat it, the biggest concern is when those shoots are in that 8 to 12 inch range. A big windstorm can knock a good amount of shoots off of the plant. So we use a movable wire system, so we can move the wires up as the plants grow to help protect it from the wind being able to break those off. So it'd be a VSP system for our trellising.
Yeah, I noticed with our block especially, although I think you utilize it in a lot of your stuff, you will leave that top wire on the sun side off, essentially, as opposed to bringing those vines up to the wire. You'll sort of let it flop over into the row, and I'm assuming that's for shading purposes.
Yeah, for afternoon sun. On the morning side, we're going to pin it up really tight and try to get as much sun exposure as we can on there. Afternoon, we're going to try to leave some sprawl to create some shading to protect the clusters in those hot, and seems more recently very hot summers that we have to make it through. Yeah,
for sure. I know one of the things that we noticed with your block, and it's consistently year after year. And what's the spacing that you have out there again?
It's 8 by 5 in your block, so 1,089 plants per acre.
We consistently get, even when we go down to one cluster per shoot, which we do with you. I don't know how many of your clients are doing the same thing, but I think after the first couple of years, we realized, gosh, even at one cluster per shoot, we're still easily getting 3.5 tons to the acre out there. You have a very consistent, high quality, healthy fruit clusters in your vineyard. We never have to worry about clusters being too small. We never have to worry about our weights coming in low. Even in vintage like 2020, where we saw significantly reduced yields everywhere. And Keith can chime in here if he can remember. But
specifically 2021, 2020 was small, and then 2021 was really small.
Yeah.
But we still got 3 1/4, 3 1/3 tons per acre off the Elene's block.
Yeah. Do you see that across your entire vineyard, Brandon? It's fairly consistent? I mean, I know that you are farming some stuff with tonnage in mind, but with your other clients, with your smaller producers that maybe you're looking, again, to make that $50, $60, $70 bottle of wine, are you seeing that your yields across the board on that farm are fairly consistent?
Cluster size will vary, which changes a lot. We kind of have our targets on how many clusters we want. It's that mid-year game every year. That's the hardest decision ever, is how many clusters to drop off of the plant.
Yeah.
Because you're doing a guesstimate, you're taking your lag weights and you're putting in equations saying, well, it should weigh this much at the end. But that's always a scary thing. I know when I first moved home and I was learning under my dad, it was always that you cannot put it back on there once you take it off. So I would say my biggest problem was probably overcropping things for quite a while, just on that fear of being too light. Now with you, when we started doing that single cluster, the best thing about that is it's given me this multi-year confidence that now I can kind of move that into other winemakers and like, we've done this in this block and this spacing and it's working great. Let's move that into here. And it was giving me that confidence to know that I'm not going to be too light at that single cluster mark.
So we've got, Keith can speak to this. We've got 3 clones of Cabernet out there, along with our Cab Franc. I think with 2 acres of clone 8, which is our kind of preferred clone we've worked with for a long time. We've got clone, we have 191 out there?
Yep, 191 and clone 4.
And 24, yeah. Keith, why don't you talk about, from a winemaking perspective, with these 3 different clones of Cabernet out there? Because the reality is we do farm all 3 of these blocks almost identically. I think in clone 8, because we have 2 acres, we may make some, I don't necessarily think farming decisions. I think we make some picking decisions to pick an early pick and a later pick in that clone 8, because we have so much of it. It allows us to play with maybe some different styles and stuff. But Keith, what do you see from a winemaking perspective?
Yeah, so it's a great block to work with, because we just touched on how consistent it is. And so year after year, some places you go and you try to pick these differences between clones, but one year it's this, one year it's that. But at Phinny, it is so consistent every year. And the other part of that is the fruit comes in absolutely immaculate. I mean, there's not a leaf in a bin. There's not a shriveled berry. I mean, it's just as beautiful of fruit as you could ever ask for, which really allows us to kind of highlight and contrast those differences. And so from what I see, Clone 191 for sure, smallest berries, higher acid, more tannic, which I think suits the site. I think Clone 191 has been our top performer the last few years from that site. Clone 8 and Clone 4 both have a little bit larger berries. I would say that Clone 4 tends to reach kind of a physiological ripeness a little earlier than Clone 8. It has a little more flavor to it. And so we typically pick it a little sooner than the bulk of the Clone 8, because we have so much more Clone 8. But it's just been a really fun site, again, with that consistency, to really be able to do absolutely everything we do in the cellar, every variation on fermentation, every kind of barrel you can use on this, and really explore the differences between these clones, and be able to do it every single year instead of instead of setting up a trial and then never getting to do it again. So that for me is probably the most exciting thing about working with it, is that consistency, the variety of the clones, and the ability to really push things and try things and see where it goes.
And that fruit ends up in a large part, ends up in the Conjurer. Certainly our best lots end up in the Illusionist. And then the pressed juice, of course, ends up in the Spellbinder. And so for those of you who are familiar with our wines, of course, you've definitely had Phinny Hill Vineyard fruit in your wines if you've had any of our Bordeaux varietals. I believe the Cab Franc ends up in our Archimage.
Yeah, it splits. It's sometimes Archimage, sometimes Conjurer. And once again, 5 acres and that consistent yield, we take the very best of it, what we get, and it goes into the Illusionist, sometimes the Archimage. But really, this block makes up a big core and a big chunk of the personality of the Conjurer, just because we have that quantity of it every year.
Yeah, and that there's a consistency in the Conjurer every year from the standpoint, it's always a lot of Cab Franc in it. And so you get those, and then obviously Cabernet too. And so all those herbal notes. And that's the one thing I find that I do get from Phinny, is there's a great herbal quality, which, we just call classic Cab and classic Cab Franc characteristics that come from the fruit from your vineyard, Brandon. So we definitely appreciate that. Keith, what have we not touched on? We touched on the soil. We touched on
you're sitting there right above the Columbia River, Brandon, and I just wanted to talk about water a little bit. You see all those circles up there on the 4-7 hills. What's your water source? And do you have any concerns about drought in that area? Are you pretty insulated against it? Just talk about water a little bit.
Yeah, so our irrigation system, it's essentially set up as a co-op where we're all owners of a certain percent, which was set up by Bud Mercer, Mercer Ranches that surrounds us, and who my dad worked for 35 plus years, I believe. And so they have a pump station out of the river. It's pumped up from the river up through multiple booster pumps and things along the way. So very stable water source, shouldn't be going anywhere. Anybody who is like pumping out of a well or something, there's always that concern of the aquifer and what the levels are and going deeper or anything like that. So luckily we haven't had to face any of those battles.
I've talked to a couple of other people who irrigate with river water and talk about the filtration required to get it clean enough to go through those drip emitters. Is that something you encounter and have to battle every year?
Yes, for like the seashells and little shells of some nature that will fill up filter systems and stuff. And especially with the drip, we have like multimedia sand filters. So they'll have rock, gravel, sand, and it'll filter through those. So that was something, as we took pivots out, of course, you have to improve and enhance the filter system to then make it where it'll go through a drip line and keep clean. But the river water is really good for like pHs and stuff. There's not a lot of balancing that needs to be done, where some people will be, if they have acidic soils, where they're going to be injecting something else into their lines also to help combat that, which we haven't had to deal with.
Great. And then how many inches of rain do you get out there a year?
It's typically, I believe that 6 to 8 mark is the annual precipitation. So not very much.
It's good. There's a big river right next to you, right?
Yeah. That, and after I graduated from college, there was 8 years I lived down in South Florida, and I'm pretty sure we got that most afternoons while we would get here. So
no doubt. Awesome. Well, Brandon, thank you so much for spending some time with us. We really look forward to sort of sending this video out into the world for all of our customers to learn a little bit more about Phinny Hill Vineyard, is certainly our estate block. But I mentioned beauty, and I mentioned Dunham. Who else are you working for?
Oh shoot, that I always said it was 15, and I think this year we sent out like 24 invoices to different wineries. So the number's gone up quite a bit. you guys, just looking at Walla Walla, you got Gramercy, Mark Ryan, Dunham, of course, has been one that we've been working with for a long time. You got Reiniger, El Corazon. I don't want to Prospis. Now that I've started, I hate to leave anybody out of that. No, but that in your neck of the woods, in that Walla Walla area, that's a few.
Awesome. Sorry about that. Okay. Well, listen, thank you so much, Brandon. We look forward to seeing you this spring. Make sure you have enough propane for next week. Looks like it's getting cold again. I saw single-digit temperatures coming our way. I don't know if you saw that or not, but looks like Sunday high of 20 and a low of 6, and Monday it's going to be even colder than that. So I think you'll be fine out there. Everything's fairly dormant. Have you guys already started to prune out there, by the way?
Yeah, so you're right. On the dormant, we should still be, cold hardiness should be very good right now. So I don't think I'd worry too much about those temperatures. I just saw low teens, so hopefully you're seeing a little cooler somewhere else. And the crew started back yesterday. So we've been pre-pruning for a little while now, but the hand crew's out pruning away. I'll have to get some pictures and videos up soon.
Awesome. Yeah, we'd appreciate it.
And then also, in a kind of conclusion to this, I want to say thank you for having me on here. The biggest thing that Phinny Hill does is works with the right people, and working with some of the best helps make us look even better. So I appreciate being on here and being part of your guys' program.
Awesome. You're a big part of our program and important to us. And we appreciate the support you give us, and we'll do everything that we can to support you as well, buddy. Awesome. All righty. Well, let's go ahead and we'll stop recording. And everybody, hopefully we'll see you guys soon. And next time you pick up a bottle of Illusionist or Conjurer, don't forget how special Phinny Hill Vineyard is. Thanks, you guys.